One other area about vegetarian, this should say vegetarian and vegan iron status, sometimes there have been concerns in the medical community, not that we have more anemia, but that we have lower serum ferritin levels. And pretty well every vegetarian I've ever met has low serum ferritin levels, including myself. Not lower than normal necessarily, but kind of at the low end of the spectrum. So we find that for vegetarians, they don't have more iron deficiency anemia. They have enough iron in their blood to cart the oxygen around and get rid of the carbon dioxide and do the job. But serum ferritin is a storage form of iron. It's like the iron that's sitting on the shelf in case you ever need it. And that is typically lower, but they don't affect how you feel because you aren't using that iron anyway. The most recent evidence, however, suggests that the lower serum ferritin is actually an advantage. Iron is a pro-oxidant, and it seems that this lower serum ferritin levels are linked with better insulin sensitivity and less risk of type 2 diabetes, and less risk of coronary heart disease and colon cancer. And so these were some interesting things. If you do find that you're questioning your recent blood tests or anything like that, it can be interesting to know that maybe it's an advantage that you were at the low end of the spectrum for ferritin. Now, about calcium and cow's milk, this is something that has certainly been in the advertising industry, that we need calcium, but we don't need cow's milk any more than the milk of any other species, camels or dogs or cats or anything. Human milk is a very good idea in your first year or 3 years or 4 years. But we do need to get calcium. So let's look at how the different types of vegetarian diets do. We find that the lacto-vegetarian, so that's people that are using dairy, have quite a range in calcium intakes, and some of them quite high. Remember, the recommended intake is about 1,200 milligrams if you're over 50 and 1,000 up till 50 years of age. So your goal might be 1,000 milligrams. And from about 42 different studies that have been done, the lacto-vegetarians on average in each of the studies had this range. The vegans, in many respects, were doing quite well, and some of them not so well, particularly in some of the Asian countries, were quite low. And I find it different too when I go to different countries. For example, when I was in Paris and Copenhagen lately, my partner, he had a conference in Copenhagen, and we went there, and then I spoke a lot with the vegetarians, and they don't have very many fortified foods. They have quite a different attitude to supplements. So their intakes can be quite low, whereas in North America, we have abundant fortified foods. I mean, really good non-dairy milks. And so I think things are shifting in terms of the vegan intakes, and some people have quite high recommended, close to recommended intakes. The raw vegans tend to be on the low side because of not using the fortified foods. That could be topped up with a supplement, which sometimes isn't a choice that people want to make. But we don't really know how this is going to work out until people are older, because with calcium, you kind of find out whether it worked or not when you get older, because then your bones are saying, well, that wasn't enough calcium. With calcium, we gain our bone mineralization up until the age of 30. So you want plenty of calcium intake then. And then we level out, and then at menopause for women, or a little bit later for men, there's a drop. And so you just want to, at these different stages, make sure you've got adequate intakes. You don't need more than adequate. But I know for myself, I have tracked my bone density, because Brenda and I both do this a lot. We want to find out what really works for people. And I found that around menopause, so that was like at the age of 50, so about 20 years ago, I was, let's see, I lost bone density right at that point, which pretty well everybody does, but I didn't like the loss that I was having. So I made absolutely sure I got up to recommended intakes of calcium, and then my bone density leveled out. And then I made sure that I started doing weight-bearing exercise every day, like maybe 6 days a week, but like an hour of something. And then it started inching its way up, and then I've started more recently making sure I had enough vitamin D intakes, and it actually increased in recent years. So you can really affect your bone health by making some good choices here. That's what I want to see, all these old people that chose plant-based diets doing really well when they're 105, you know, just in glowing health. And so the many calcium-rich plant foods that we can have if we start going around here, these low oxalate greens, Napa cabbage, or it's called sui choy, it has a few names, broccoli, kale, these are all very, very well absorbed calcium. So even on a raw diet, if you didn't have so much calcium intake, but you had lots of these things, they're absorbed at about twice the rate of something like the calcium in cow's milk or in tofu, calcium set tofu. You can have figs, they're a good source, almonds. So actually we had a lovely raw dinner last night that had this whole top row of calcium in it, pretty much. And then blackstrap molasses, just a little tablespoon of it, can have, and I had some of that for breakfast too, thank you, David. It can, a spoonful of that has the calcium of half a cup of milk, so it's a good calcium source. The black beans, brown beans, and white beans are all good calcium sources. And then the calcium fortified foods, the non-dairy milks, the calcium set tofu. So just start looking at the labels, and there's quite a variation, but you can find your own preferred pattern. So in the calcium absorption, which I mentioned, we think of dairy products as being the kind of gold standard just because industry tells us that. But we get about 30% of the calcium from those foods, as we do from soy milk or tofu. Then from things like sweet potatoes, almonds, sesame seeds, or tahini and beans, we get about 20%. Then there's some low oxalate greens. So if you're trying to get your calcium from spinach or chard or beet greens, you won't get as much out. You will get some. It doesn't cause any problems. I mean, these are healthy foods, but you don't get that much calcium. On the other hand, these low oxalate greens, we get very high amounts, and also from the fortified juices, which can be another way to get calcium. So if we also, go back. If we also want to increase our calcium and absorption of other minerals, when we soak, sprout, ferment, and yeast different foods, we increase calcium availability. And people like Anne Wigmore were talking about sprouting and doing sprouting. And I've been down to her institute in Puerto Rico, Rincon, and seen their sprouting operation. And somehow she figured this out like 30, 40 years ago, that sprouting was a good thing. And it amazingly increases our mineral absorption. So again, if the actual calcium intakes of raw food people were lower, they may be getting more calcium out of the foods. So anyway, these are things that science hasn't done that much research on yet, like how the raw fooders are going to do in 30 years, 40 years, but there's some possibilities there. We want to avoid excess salt, and we want to avoid excess protein, but that means not like the great big steaks, but you do need to get enough protein because protein's a really important part of bone. So the choices that support bone health, there are many, many nutrients in bone, not just calcium, and we need some things that are in salads, like one of the studies showed that people that ate some sort of lettuce or leafy green every day did way better in terms of bone health. And that's vitamin K. It could be also vitamin A, which is in orange and red and yellow vegetables, the beta carotenes. Vitamin C, and also potassium from fruit, magnesium from green veggies, boron that's in all sorts of plant foods, and zinc that's in things like cashews and seeds. And so the whole spectrum of food that we eat supports our bones, not just one item like milk. Also the weight-bearing exercise, think about it, how much you've done this week. If you can manage to do something and inch your way up, like choosing to go for a walk with a friend instead of sitting somewhere, or going to the gym, something like that. And so aim for 60 minutes. I know when I was talking 10 years ago, we were talking 30 minutes 3 times a week. You know, it's really changed a lot what our goals are now. Vitamin D is an interesting one. We are here at 53 degrees north, so we're up there. And this line shows, above this line, people have vitamin D winter. And that means when it's winter time, they're not producing vitamin D. Well, in Edmonton, you know how long winter goes, right? It's, what would you consider it? I know it's for sure from October to April. Yeah, so it's kind of half the year. And during that time, even if you stood outside bare naked, which you would never want to do, you would not be making vitamin D. In the summer, on the other hand, if you put your forearm and your face in the sun, you can make vitamin D in about 10 or 15 minutes on a day when there's not clouds. And so what we find is that Canadians are often, on our average, vitamin D levels are at the low end of the normal range. And perhaps even that normal range should be set a little higher. The research on vitamin D is coming out fast and furious, and there are many, many reasons to get our vitamin D levels up. So in this part of the world, we need vitamin D supplements for kids. We need vitamin D supplements in winter for all of us. Even I had kind of a surprise a few years ago. I had a lovely year when I was going to Italy, and for I think 5 weeks in Italy and more southern Europe, and 2 weeks in Hawaii, and then I had my vitamin D checked in February, and I thought, oh, it'll be really good, you know, I had all this time in the sun, and it was half below the low end of normal. Like, it was really low. But then I realized at the age I am, my vitamin D production is about 25% that of a 25-year-old. Because when we get older, we don't produce it as effectively. And so then I started taking vitamin D, and went at first to about 3,000 milligrams a day, or sorry, international units.